Welcome back, everyone, to another casual chat with the usual crew. Today we'll be talking about Israel.
Wait.
No.
I was about to say, can we not commit podcast suicide?
That implies that we've got anything bad to say about Israel.
I'll be on my way, lads.
Alright, moving swiftly on. So, we are instead talking today about heroism. So, who would like to start us off?
I think just to mix things up, Rupert should start us off.
Well, no, if Henry actually genuinely has a point, then I'll make a change.
I genuinely have a point this time.
Go on.
It's amazing. Basically, what I wanted to talk about when you suggested the topic of hero worship was the current amazing trend of NHS key worker hero worship and all the what should we call it, virtue signalling and all the extra baggage that goes along with that.
It's cringe.
It's very cringe. But that is an interesting frame of reference, because I was going to start from the other side of that, but starting from the position of where we are, where people are considered heroes just for doing their job, that's a pretty interesting place to start to then, go back into how we got here.
Yeah. Well, I feel like I'm just going to jump straight into it. I feel like this specific hero worship, because it's not just the key workers, it's also how do we be charitable? The more introverted types liking to believe themselves heroes for, staying home and wearing a mask and just not doing anything, which they were probably going to do anyway because they're the introverted types. And I feel like a lot of it stems from just the lack of any real sort of cultural and societal conflicts that we've got.
Also, to add to this, I've forgotten where I saw this, so I guess I'd have to double check myself later, but it's like how in schools apparently they're trying to create like child heroes or something like that, which frankly sounds like another to me it sounds like another like participation ribbon thing, where when you talk about like the modern context, what we're trying to discuss about like heroes and the front, like you say, frontline NHS workers, and we basically just hear like we're celebrating them for doing their job ? And to me, it just seems like another extension of basically celebrating mediocrity in a way. Well, don't get me wrong, I appreciate NHS workers for what they do, but it's like, but when people are like, but they're making it out as if they're being so self-sacrificing and everything, it's like, well, that's the choice they made. It wasn't like, it's not like a situation where someone's put a live hand grenade and one person, a live hand grenade in a group and one person jumps on it to smother the explosion to save everybody else. It's not that kind of situation.
Yeah, it's less going above and beyond the Call of Duty and more just they're being useful to society at large in a very public way, and so obviously there must be heroes.
Well, so I was just going to suggest that if we're getting into sort of how the term has been perverted, it'd be a good idea to sort of circle back to what it actually means to be a hero. And, maybe there's some contention in this, but I think what you were saying earlier with the idea of going above and beyond the Call of Duty, as it were, and more specifically, I suppose, exhibiting distinctly unusual virtue, I guess. Being somebody that not only exhibits virtue, but virtue in a notable quantity that makes them like remarkable, particularly remarkable in that sense. Although it's interesting that when I was looking up the original etymology, it had a lot of links to sort of chivalry as well, because it's contrasted against the villain, of course, and villain being someone who was similar to serf. It's almost like a synonym of serf.
Yeah, you're saying it's people full of virtue that go above and beyond the Call of Duty. It's also when a lot of people would also say that a quality of a genuine hero is someone who is very much willing to sacrifice something of themselves in order to benefit someone else, or to sacrifice themselves in a way that benefits their greater ideals that we consider virtuous. hence like the links to chivalry and everything like that, where it's considered heroic that someone will sacrifice something for the sake of not his own honor, but somebody else's honor, maybe. That sort of thing.
The direction I was going to take this in is sort of more classical ideas of heroes that we see, well, certainly in very old Western mythology and legend. So figures like Hercules from ancient Greece would be like considered someone heroic, or archetype, the archetype of a heroic character, or Beowulf from the epic poem. These sort of characters who do what is right in essentially for no other reason that it is the right thing to do and that they have the capacity to do it.
Well, let's just be clear as well. There is an interesting dimension here that heroism, as far as I can tell, has sort of connotations of, I guess if I was to put on my Marxist lens, it has like connotations of almost like class warfare, where somebody who is knightly is somebody who automatically has like more virtue, and that therefore there's somebody to be respected and to be upheld, whereas the lower orders, the serfs, the workers, the people who are tied to the land and of very low status, those people are more associated with vice and villainy. So that's kind of an interesting dimension in itself, but
I really want to immediately combat that lens by saying that as much as you can say you can define this by like a classism lens, a Marxist lens, or whatever. It's like, yes, but when it comes to class divide, you're then changing expectations. It's a lot easier for a peasant or serf of that time to actually exhibit heroic traits in that they're not expected to be as virtuous as a knight. So the standards for them to be heroic is actually much lower, whereas the standard for being heroic as a knight is way much higher because of the fact that it's like, well, you're already by default meant to be virtuous by your classification of being a chivalrous knight.
Maybe, but there is the... So if we're talking about some kind of like objective level that has to be, reached, then it's more just a case of like expectations. It's not necessarily that a knight would not be a hero because they are expected to exhibit some of those virtues. It's that I suppose they are in that position and thus they are expected to be more heroic. So that would be another way of looking at this and almost like flipping the Marxist angle on its head in a sense, because it's saying, yes, these people are higher and they're higher in society because it's the correct place for them to be because they are more virtuous. So, these things are related, and the fact that the serf is in his position is, some kind of indication as to like what their state of virtue is. And this isn't like a perfect representation, but this is one way of thinking about it. It's like it's not a perfect representation of the extent to which virtue and vice would translate into, social status in society. But I think that's kind of as far as I can tell, that's kind of like the mindset that this is coming from.
I mean, that brings to mind the quote, by nature of definition, only the coward is capable of the highest heroism.
Right.
And I suppose going along with that, you have... I suppose, yeah, so the greatest heroes are ones that aren't expected to be, whereas if you have... Going on with the knight example, well, yes, they have greater expectations of heroism, even without actually having witnessed or having actually done any heroism. Just from the basic aspect of being a knight, they get some respect for the heroism of all knights, as it were.
Do you think this is where the displeasure of the whole NHS workers being hailed as heroes is that they may be putting themselves at risk and working long hours and tiring themselves out, but they have actively put themselves in this position that they have chosen to be doctors and nurses, and therefore it's expected of them?
That seems like a pretty big component, yeah.
And yeah, I mean, as callous as that might sound, I feel like that is 100% how I feel. It's like... oh god, this is going to sound like a terrible example. It's like, I will have sympathy for a war veteran, but but my sympathy will reach its limit when he is distraught over the fact that he's killed people. It's like, sorry, but if you went into the military thinking you were not going to kill someone, then you were clearly very deluded from the beginning.
I suppose the issue with it for me is more. There are some members of the NHS, some doctors and nurses that are actively going above and beyond the call of duty. They are working like way more hours than they're needing to. They're saving loads of lives. And then there are some that are just cleaning the floors, or they're just plodding along with whatever they were normally going to do. And the NHS as a whole, I think we've talked about how the NHS as a whole is a bit of a corrupt system already. I can't remember, but the NHS as a whole is the thing getting the credit, and so there's a lot of stolen valor in that, at least for me.
So if I was to try and put this in easier terms, what's more annoying you is the fact that the whole celebrating frontline workers is being collectivized rather than being treated like it should be, which is celebrating specific individuals within the NHS.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't even care if they. Sorry, I don't even care if they focus on the thing that they normally do with the BBC and the mainstream media of pick the brown one and focus on them. I don't even care if they do that, as long as they're picking someone who is actually doing something exceptional. I'd much rather that than just everyone.
Go on, clap for your NHS worker.
Now that you mention it, that does actually seem to be. I hadn't thought of it like that before, but now that you've mentioned it, the idea that it's just this idea of collectivizing this valor. They're like just praise all of them regardless, just on sight, immediately thank them for their service regardless of who they are, rather than the more traditional sense of a hero as being an individual who is worthy of note, who is worthy of praise.
I think that's maybe where this distaste is coming from, because I feel like the kind of idea of a hero is intrinsically linked to a singular person. So I guess to go back, it's almost like, when we discuss great men and the poet, and or that all great men are poets or something, and in the sense a heroic figure is someone who has a story about them. It's easy to write a story about an individual or a very specific group of people. But when it comes to the NHS, it's hard because it's a collective group that's expected to do this job, whereas, you can maybe think of, like, in a war, there is, like, a heroic battalion or something that held off an assault because they were held off, like, a 3-1 assault against them because they were just held up, and they just held their line for as long as they could. And it's a lot easier to pick out a group of individuals rather than just collectivize an entire system. Like, at some point you get way too many people for it to make a sensible story. Like, I don't think decades down the line anyone's going to talk about the great heroic acts of the NHS. Why would you celebrate what is basically a government body?
I suppose by their nature a hero is someone who stands out from a crowd, so trying to turn a crowd into... trying to apply that same logic to a crowd is sort of a bit cross-wired.
Yeah.
Yes, but I think I would say that although it's unusual to apply to a collective, because heroism needs to come out of an act of will, I would say, there are instances where you do get collective acts of heroism. So one example in particular that comes to mind is the I think it's known to history as the Attack of the Dead Men, where the defenders of a Russian fortress in World War One, or the Russian defenders of a fortress in World War One rather, were attacked by gas without having sufficient equipment to protect themselves from that, and so despite being essentially condemned to death, they decided to attack the German soldiers who were coming to clean up the fortress after of whatever remnants were left in a bayonet charge. Now, I'm sure they were ordered into doing that, but that strikes me as a collective act of heroism. The fact that they all went ahead with that, and I'm pretty sure they all died.
Mm. Well, I think because that is a good example. I think you can definitely have collective acts of heroism. Like, even if you do want to bring it to the group level of, well, I suppose the sentiment has sort of been lost a bit these days, but the boys in blue, or just like the British Army as they've gone off to war, it's sort of there is a some heroism and some celebration of that because they are actually going to do something brave, and it's something that, especially if they're volunteering for it, they're doing something difficult. Whereas I don't know how long we want to talk about this NHS stuff, but a lot of what they're doing is just, they're monitoring oxygen levels and increasing and decreasing the little knob, and they're sitting there for hours doing that. It's not really that, like, you don't have to be brave to do it. You just need to have the patience and the technical skill.
I guess my question then, in regards to your idea of boys in blue and volunteering for the army, is that really much different than, say, being part of a night class then? It's just you're given a certain amount of respect because you've taken up a certain amount of virtue there?
I did want to circle back
I think
around
you're
to this
right.
point,
I think
actually.
that's the same.
Because I think I'd like to push back on the expectations side a little bit. I think it comes in sometimes, but there is an extent to which somebody has to just do what they do, and maybe this is, I think, why knights shine more brightly as figures of sort of heroism, because they have the means to, I guess, exert their will more in ways that individuate them. So if you have a certain amount of resources and a certain amount of leisure time to go with that, then you can start choosing, like, making more meaningful choices about your life, and thus you get the opportunities for heroism because you can do things like self-sacrifice. So if somebody inherits a bunch of wealth, and they inherit a big estate, and they spend basically their entire life helping other people and spend no time on themselves, then they are being heroic in a manner of speaking, albeit not martial. But that's just not something that's really available to somebody who's poorer, because they have to spend a much greater percentage of their time and their concentration and their mental space on just staying alive and sort of plodding along.
Do you mind if I bring this back to the whole comparison of the army to the NHS for a moment?
Go ahead.
Right, so they are very similar in a lot of senses, and this is something that I'm hoping that we as a group can pin down here, because I can't quite formulate a coherent opinion on it. It's a little uncharitable, but let's stick with that phrasing. So, in a lot of senses, it is very similar. If you're joining the army, it's becoming your job. You're expected to go, like, kill, fight, die. That's what you've signed up for. And so there's a less heroic element to it in the sense that we've laid out so far in this conversation. And yet many people would consider servicemen to be heroes by default. And that a very similar line of logic is being applied to the NHS workers at the moment, that they are putting themselves on the line for... I think the obvious immediate comparison is that working in a COVID ward is not quite as dangerous as or by a long shot as being on a battlefield. What is it exactly? Pin down why the hero worship of the NHS is so much less palatable than the hero worship of the armed forces.
Because I would say that duty and responsibility are antithetical to heroism, essentially. So if a soldier is in the army and then war gets declared and they are sent off, then that entails much less heroism than somebody who joins up, voluntarily after a war has been declared in order to, support his country or whatever. The actual actions that they carry out when they're in the army also makes a pretty significant difference, obviously. And so you can just sort of be involved and do the minimum necessary to help out your country, or you can actually try and make meaningful moves to bring the war to a close, achieve great victories for your country, and or save your comrades. Whereas if a soldier in the professional army goes off to war, then they're kind of just doing something that they signed up to do under different circumstances, but knowing that was part of the risk. And that still enables certain amounts of heroism because they're in the environment where there are fewer expectations, I suppose, in a lot of ways, because you're just expected to keep yourself alive. So any time that you're doing something that is contrary to that, but has a tangible aim that could be achieved, like again saving the life of a comrade or I don't know, storming a machine gun position or any number of those kinds of things, that's an act of heroism that can be that can be tangibly felt. Whereas I think, considering, okay, put it this way: if somebody at the start of the coronavirus pandemic had stepped up specifically to help, like a nurse, a retired nurse, goes back into work in order to help them out, then that's something that is a bit more tangibly heroic, I would say. But otherwise, you're just you're working in this fairly high prestige job, doing work that you are expected to do under circumstances that you could be reasonably expected to have, counted as a risk of doing your job. So there's no heroic there, that you're only meeting duties and responsibilities.
While I agree with you, I still think that doesn't leave much distinction between the group that is the army and the group that is the NHS. I think most, if not all, people are quite comfortable saying, that all soldiers are heroes, while fewer people are comfortable to say all NHS workers are heroes.
I think it's because they don't actually mean the word hero. I think that it's more they're saying it out of almost a method of respect. It's like saying a soldier deserves more respect than an NHS worker.
I mean, yeah, we're assuming...
I don't think they mean hero. Yeah, I don't think they mean hero. When people say soldiers are heroes, I don't think they're meaning it in a literal sense.
We're assuming constant definitions, and that may also not necessarily be true. I mean, we may just be using the term hero as a stand-in for good person, but something with a little bit more grandiosity to it.
I suppose. Okay, here's a question for the class then. Florence Nightingale and her nurses, and the doctors and nurses that were behind the lines in World War One and Two. Are they heroes, or are they just people that are doing a very good job and virtuous people because of the job that they're doing? Because I think that, at least for me, going as far as to call them heroes, bearing in mind that they are in a situation where they're behind the lines of the people actually doing the fighting, even though they are saving lives, it's not a hero thing. It's more of it's a good thing they're doing, but I wouldn't go that far. That's where it goes for me with the NHS. Is
it's a necessity of the circumstances.
Okay, I'm quite comfortable with the idea that hero is simply a overused term that is probably being misapplied in that case.
Yes, but there's also something about this example of people. So let's be really generous and say, probably the best example that I could give is I believe it was the Tsar's daughters in World War One Russia that all volunteered to help at military hospitals and such. So they obviously don't need to do that, but they do anyway. But something about that example still doesn't pass the smell test of hero for me. Maybe you could get me there to call it an act of heroism, but to my mind that is slightly different to calling someone a hero. Calling someone a hero almost has there's a much greater weight there, I suppose. I'm trying to find a better word and I can't think. Do you know what I mean?
I know what you mean, because
a hero has a certain gravitas to them. There's an aspirational value to them.
Yeah, comparing someone like Mary Seacole, who was also somebody who was like a volunteer nurse, just helping basically out of the goodness of her heart and out of her own pocket, helping soldiers. Even comparing her to Achilles doesn't seem right at all. Is that just me?
Still a very good person, though.
Yeah, very good person.
Yeah, 100%. When you make that comparison, it's so very weird. I guess but then it's not, that doesn't work either, because I'm thinking maybe it's to do with inspiration, but then it's I'm pretty sure if you told someone the story of Mary Seacole, they would be somewhat inspired, unless that goes in degrees as well, because I feel like when we think heroes, we also think something that's inspirational.
I think
it makes you feel more. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I think the difference and the distinction is for me is that heroism is placing yourself in personal danger. To not a definition, but it gives me the sense of placing yourself in personal danger in order to save someone from a danger that they're in, or a danger that they might face in the future. So, like, I think we had an example earlier: diving on a grenade that is in the middle of your comrades. You're putting yourself in personal danger to save the people around you.
Is selflessness synonymous with heroism? I'm not sure that it is. Again,
it's not necessarily, but so even like, stopping someone getting mugged by joining the fight or something. It's not necessarily like you're actively going, okay, I will get stabbed instead of that person. You're just joining the fight to stop them getting stabbed. But the difference with a lot of these other examples is that there's no danger to the person there. They're just helping people, which is a virtuous thing, but it's not putting themselves in any danger. It's not great sacrifice to themselves.
That seems to be implying that being around sick people, helping them, is not a danger to their own health.
I feel like it gets very difficult because then there are so many different definitions to, not even definitions, but examples of something that we consider heroic, because obviously I was the one who brought up like the whole self-sacrifice thing. Well, in the grenade example, you're going to get hurt anyway. You're probably going to get hurt. It's just you have a choice between, can I minimize how much I'm going to get hurt, or can I minimize how much everybody else is going to get hurt? It's that there's that situation, and then of course it's like we do consider someone heroic for. I mean, like you only have to go to the labors of Hercules to understand that it's considered heroic that he kills the Hydra, even though no one in that situation is actually under threat. He's not running in there to save someone. He's running in there to slay something that is evil,
and minding its own business, might I add.
Was Hercules just playing Monster Hunter? I mean, all right. With the Hercules example, there is of course the idea that the Hydra was a dangerous creature, and that anyone who stumbled across it was a dangerous creature in that anyone who stumbled across it was almost certainly going to be killed. So removing it from the world was good in that sense, and also that it was, on account of the fact it was a monster in a legend, was a personification of evil itself. And banishing pure evil from the world is always going to have a heroic connotation to it.
Right, exactly. So if you take it into the metaphysical sort of sphere, then if you're just confronting evil itself, then that is a heroic act, definitely.
So is the issue with the whole we don't appreciate the whole all NHS workers are heroes is because COVID isn't some personification of evil? The virus hasn't twirled its mustache at us and threatened to destroy the world or anything. It's just a virus doing its thing.
No, to me, it's very closely tied to this whole duty angle. But there is also there is also an aesthetic quality here that, again, I used the term smell test earlier. That something that it really just doesn't pass the smell test for me. It doesn't meet the aesthetic threshold of heroism.
Yeah. A lot of that, at least for me, is it's the people doing the praising, let's be honest. It's the virtue signalling middle class housewives and or mothers that they don't really care about the NHS. They don't really care that the virus is or that people are being treated for the virus because they can just sort of stay at home. It's these people that would never be willing to put themselves in any sort of danger and would rather just, clap every Thursday or whatever day it was and just say, okay, we appreciate you, that'll be done with it, rather than actually, trying to promote increased wages for, what's the word? Like bonus pay for nurses and personal protective equipment and stuff like that.
I mean, let's be fair. They do also push for that kind of stuff as well.
Not as often, though.
Yeah, but also it's... Well, I feel like there's a big difference there because they're relying on... Obviously, let's be perfectly honest, the whole clap for the NHS thing is just a empty platitude.
Yeah, exactly.
What about
at least that's the sort of reading of the room I'm getting, is that we all feel like that's an empty platitude, and then when it comes to like, we need to increase NHS wages as like a reward or as a means to help our workers more. That doesn't require any kind of real sacrifice on their part, other than just like, oh, that just comes out of the tax and Big Brother government will take care of that for me. Whereas if it was to be like you actively decide, I'm going to make lunches for everyone at my local hospital and deliver them myself, I feel like that's a very different idea of helping NHS workers, if you get my drift.
Depends whether or not they post it all over social media first.
Okay, let me add an additional quality or qualifier, I suppose, because that doesn't pass the smell test for me either. I think in order to the hero is someone who is, I guess, almost like a demigod in sort of like popular imagination and mythology and such. So I think that in order to qualify as a hero, they have to do something which is beyond the scope of most people's expectations, understanding, and what they perceive as possible. So, you know, if I would point to someone like, as I recall, there was a stretcher bearer in World War One, who, I'm using a lot of World War One examples today, who went and, I'm pretty sure it was basically on his own, rescued 3 soldiers under heavy machine gun and artillery fire, and, you know, brought them back into safety and then ran back off to, you know, go back into the danger to go and pull someone else out. Or the other example would be Desmond Doss, who did a not dissimilar thing, but saved, God, was it 40-something or 60-something lives over the course of a night. And also, you know, he that was also coming from a perspective of, you know, vowing not to take a life and all that kind of thing. So I think for most people that kind of like goes a little bit beyond their not only their sort of self-preservation instincts, but what they would perceive as you know, being reasonably possible by anyone sane and human.
Right, and just to clarify, Rupert, I wasn't saying the whole idea of making lunches for the NHS is heroic. I'm saying that the people that Henry brought up are trying to do like absolutely not at the absolute bare minimum to feel better about themselves, when I'm saying they could actually do something that's actively more helpful. I wasn't actually trying to say that it's heroic to do that.
They're outsourcing their generosity, sure, but that was the thought that came to mind when you explained that.
I mean, bringing it back to the point Rupert just made of needing to go beyond what most people would believe humanly possible. I believe it's often been said of earning the Victoria Cross that one needs to be insane with bravery in order to obtain it.
Yeah, I can't really think of any shorthand examples now. Is the trouble? I think they're all a bit too sort of weird and specific.
Also, I'm glad you did actually use some real world examples, because I was being like, you were using a lot of mythological examples, and it's like Rupert, no one's gonna meet your aesthetic definition of a hero when they might not have even existed, or they did exist and everything's been hyper exaggerated.
Sure. Well, okay.
But you then clarified it with actual examples, and I understand that, because yeah, saving between 40 and 60 people in a single night in a war zone sounds like an absolute Mount Everest of a task to perform by a single man.
Yeah, and considering at every juncture, in order to do that, he had the opportunity to leave himself if he just wanted to preserve his own life, but you know, he chose not to until it was physically impossible for him to save anyone else, as I recall.
I mean, you make it sound like he would the only time he'd consider it physically impossible is if he couldn't walk anymore.
Yeah, basically.
Oh, good grief, did he get shot in the legs or something?
I can't remember exactly what happened. I don't know how accurate Hacksaw Ridge is, but that's about him, if you've ever seen it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
No, I get you.
I think there definitely is something to the fact that heroes, or expectations of heroes, I suppose, have this sort of divine demigod quality to them. I think there's definitely a reason that, and I'm going to be that guy, there's definitely a reason that superheroes in modern day, and you know, the myths and legends of old, they have a divine quality or a superhuman quality or a saintly quality to them, depending on which examples you'll want to think of. So yeah, I think there definitely is like a heroic quality of going beyond at least what one perceives as being possible.
I'm not so sure about this whole demigod angle we're coming at it from, because, like Rupert's been saying, examples like Desmond Doss, or like, similar stories of men like Leslie Bull Allen, who achieved a very similar thing of carrying men out of combat under fire. They are mortal men, and are known to be mortal men.
Yeah,
and all of a sudden just start placing this idea of godlike qualities onto them seems unnecessary in a sense.
Yes, my point being more in sort of media. The reason that they are demigods and superhumans is because heroism itself is something that you don't expect, I suppose, normal humans to be able to do. So, yes, they are actual humans. I'm obviously not saying that you.
No, I'm not saying anyone thought that Desmond Doss was literally a godlike figure. I'm just saying that imposing that on human figures is a little odd to me.
Well, it comes back to the perception point, is that they're achieving things that most people would think to be, basically impossible. Or, the kind of thing that you'd have to read multiple times and then get a breakdown of how it happened before you started to believe that it actually took place. That's the kind of angle that I'm trying to take here.
Yeah, I know. I understand and appreciate that. I still don't think the divine angle is necessary here.
Right. I wouldn't, because of the angle you're going with, Rupert. I wanted to put this forward to you because it's amused me now that I've remembered it. But are you aware of Sher Ami during World War One?
No, I don't believe so.
Well, Sher Ami was a pigeon who managed to save what was later known as the Lost Battalion. Managed to save the remnants of the Lost Battalion after she got shot trying to deliver a message, and then got back up and still managed to deliver the message despite missing like a chunk of her breast and one of her legs. Would you describe that pigeon as heroic?
Interesting. Also, kudos us for referencing 2 Zevaton songs in a single episode.
Oh, I've been trying to slip in as many as possible.
Oh, have there been more?
Oh yeah.
Anyway, it has a heroic quality, but it's hard to put that on an animal because they don't seem to manifest their will in the same way that humans do, at least not recognizably. So it was
fair enough. I just wanted to put that. Yeah, fair enough. I wanted to put that forward to you because I just thought it was amusing.
Yeah, so to my mind, it was kind of just doing what it was trained to do, but did it with an unusual gusto, perhaps.
That is an interesting point. Is an animal capable of heroics, though? Because there's a statue somewhere in England. I found out about this recently, and I can't remember the name of the dog, but it was literally just some normal household pet that saved a bunch of school children from being attacked by 2 feral dogs, and was killed in the process. And there's a statue of that dog because it gave its own life saving children. I mean, it's not something it was trained to do. It just decided that it would give its own life to save some children. I mean, that's a pretty heroic quality.
Or Hachiko in Japan, which is, I guess, a much more tangible example in the sense that it's like one quality turned up to the extreme, that being loyalty. The idea that the dog spent, what was it, like 8 years just going back to the same spot to wait for his owner.
Again, another dog with a statue.
Yeah. So I guess that comes back around to the idea of it basically perhaps just being an extreme amount of one.
Hachiko was too pure for this world.
Yeah. Just an extreme amount of one particular virtue.
Yeah, I also find it. I'm also wondering then, in that case, if it's less about, when it comes to this heroism thing, if it's a bit like what I said about great men, when you apply the title "the Great" to someone usually after they've died, or something along those lines, where I feel like it seems to be a very human quality to apply this larger than life demigod image to something we consider heroic. So in the case of like animals, we're applying a very, humans being what we are, we're applying very human characteristics to something that isn't even human and calling it heroic. So has it got something more to do, less to do with maybe the actions of being heroic, and more just how people perceive the action as being heroic?
Yeah, I was going to say on the topic of people being referred to as the great. There's an unusual quantity of those kinds of people who happen to be close to Voltaire. So there is some reason to be dubious about some of those.
Fair enough. My issue when I think of like the selfless angle is a bit like it's one of these things where if you're going to be selfless, it needs to be definitely restrained, because someone who is too selfless is not going to be long for the world. And if you're capable of heroic acts, then allowing your value... Oh god, this is going to sound so materialistic, but I apologize. But if you are very capable of these heroic acts and everything, it is... Being too selfless would actually be a massive detriment, because then you are going to remove the value of yourself away from things. It's like... maybe it's being overly pragmatic, but it's the idea of I can save 5 people. I could save a 6th, but it could mean my own life, and that would stop me from saving many other people in the future. If you're going from if you are in the position of the hero saving lives.
Sure, yeah.
Then is being too selfless in that example actually a really bad idea, because you have more value alive than sacrificing yourself.
Yeah, there's that. Another way of putting it would be if you give away your entire wage packet every month to homeless people, then you're going to need to be supported by other people. You're going to need to impose on other people in order to support your own life. So it's not really virtue at that point. Fair comparison?
Yeah, I'd call that a fair comparison.
I suppose, though, at some point it is a matter of the type of person that is heroic and that is able to perform those heroics will have certain principles of protecting the weak and helping others that would mean that... Okay, I'll just give the example. If the next Superman comic is him saving 5 people and then stabbing an orphan, or leaving an orphan to be stabbed, I should say. There's something that's
still positive. You're still up 4 lives.
Yeah, but there's something very much taken away from the experience when he's well, I don't want to risk my life. Yeah, the virtues of a hero, at least in media, they need to be maintained in every aspect, at least every aspect that you show the consumer or the listener or what have you. Otherwise, you're showing an imperfect hero, which... I mean,
there's something to be said for imperfect heroes. The popularity of anti-heroes has skyrocketed in recent years. Like, the popularity of characters like Deadpool and the Punisher, for example, are deeply flawed men who still do some heroic acts.
Well, that's getting into heroism as a literary feature rather than heroism in the more traditional sense, where it can apply to real life.
Yeah.
I don't think you're going to find that many real life anti-heroes. It's kind of more it's more description of the protagonist versus the anti-protagonist.
Yeah, I feel like as well with the example of like using a comic book or something, that to me actually feels kind of almost close in the sense of that that when we talk about people who are heroic, we never really know about their the deep down thoughts, or the fact that they probably presented the best version of themselves to the world, because that's what we all try to do. So and it's a bit like, I've forgotten who it was, but there was someone who basically helped a lot of people escape persecution, and he didn't consider himself heroic. A lot of people applied heroic attributes to him because it was like, wow, you did this at risk of your own well-being to help save other people's lives, and he didn't feel himself heroic because he wasn't thinking about the people he saved. He was thinking about those he didn't save. And you have to wonder if maybe that's what happens in some of these heroic tales of saving lives, where the actual hero figure has done not not purposefully presented their best side. It's more that's just how it came about because people want to cling on to the good that they've done. Meanwhile, the actual heroic figure may be lamenting the heroism they haven't been able to perform.
Well, humility is part of the virtue, right?
Well, so not just that, because bringing it back to the NHS example, there are plenty of people that are in the NHS, so there's plenty of people in the NHS. There are those that aren't even dealing with the virus at all and are very much sort of, I'm not having any part of it, I don't want your praise, leave me out of it. But there are even people that are in the, the virology departments, whatever they are, the COVID intensive care wards,
That aren't,
they aren't worried about the praise. They don't like it. Because they view themselves as just doing their job. So, I mean, yes, there is a humility aspect to it, but I don't know how common it is for heroes to actually want to sort of bask in the praise and say, yes, I'm really heroic. It is, I suppose as you say, it's humility.
From almost every example I can think of, where I've seen interviews done with people who have won Victoria Crosses or Medals of Honor, or have been described as heroes for their actions, usually during war, almost none of them are ever happy about it. Is an over-exaggeration, but most of them usually feel as if they don't deserve the praise they're getting. Like Dick Winters, who was the commander of E Company of the 101st American Airborne during the Second World War, he had famously said that he was not a hero, but he had served in the company of heroes.
Right, there's a quality of humility and sort of holding themselves to higher standards than the rest of us, that or higher standards than their peers indeed as well, that I think is inherently something that at the very least is this is going to sound so vulgar, but attractive in a public relations kind of sense. But there's also something to that in that it is a virtue. I would say it's something that is someone who is not a braggart that's both someone who is aesthetically more pleasant to deal with and more easy to idolize, but also like I said, that's just virtuous. There is just virtue in not bigging yourself up too much.
That's why everyone likes Keanu Reeves so much.
Yeah, I'm also reminded of the World War I French ace Georges Guinemer, who was in a similar vein, and I don't think he was as high scoring as some of the other French aces, like was it Ferdinand Foch or something like that? I think he was the highest scoring French ace. Anyway, Guinemer though was much more sort of humble, didn't really like the spotlight all that much, and was just kind of homely and kind of came across as just sort of doing his duty and doing it well. It probably helps that he died earlier as well. He died quite young, and so there's that extra tragic element to his quality. Quality to his story, but yeah.
Well, you said you felt like it was vulgar to describe it in terms of their public relations, but I feel like on a individual level, I can only speak obviously from my own personal experience, but when you find people with with that level of humility and really high standards for themselves, you realize that there's something incredibly admirable about that. And it's something that I think a lot of people, when we start getting over, because I feel like as people in general, we get really wrapped up in our own neuroses and self-pity, and we just want things to be good, when a lot of people out there strive for this ideal, and they strive for a sort of perfection while saying, I will never be perfect. And I think that's something we find admirable and maybe even relatable in heroes.
I mean, while we're on this angle of how we view heroes, I think that is something that comes back around to the pop culture angle, where heroes are so popular right now, where all our movies and video games are filled with hero. The obvious example the Avengers, or like Batman, Superman, all in movies, comic books, TV shows, and again, our long-lasting fascination with the world wars, constantly making films about First and Second World War. I think that there's an element to that where people want to have heroes to worship, to idolize, and to aspire to be. So there's a cultural perspective there where we want these people to exist, and we want to have them. We want to put them up on a pedestal, and we want to idolize them.
Yeah, I think there's like a natural desire for that kind of an aristocratic idol. And I think that's probably a large part of where aristocracy even comes from, is this sort of division by virtue. Because, we have these heroes sort of presumably extant in society, and so finding them and then raising them upon pedestals and allowing them to sort of, bask in some of that, as much as they may not like it personally, is something that we sort of yearn for as a culture. And the lack of the opportunities of that in in real life has caused us to sort of move more towards completely fictionalized versions of that, which in some ways can be sort of perverted because they can carry all the trappings of a heroic person without actually exhibiting the heroic virtues necessarily. But I mean, to circle it back around a little bit again to why I called it vulgar, to talk about it in terms of like public relations, is that there's an implication there that you can give, more or less anyone of either mediocre or slightly above average qualities a good enough not advertising team, but PR team, and a good enough like image in the public sphere that they can become a hero. But I don't think that's actually true. I think there needs to be a lot more to them than that.
Well, it seems fairly transparent because it's like people trying to... God, I always bring this up, I'm terribly sorry. Of, Obama getting a Peace Prize for existing.
Right.
I feel like in the US they went really out of their way, the establishment that is, to try and make Obama this like hero of the people almost, and it doesn't work because we all realize just how transparent and fake and manufactured it is.
Well, it's another example of the trappings of the trappings of heroism and virtue without actually possessing the qualities.
Yeah, and it's something that I feel like is incredibly difficult to pull off and maintain, to the point where I'd say it's impossible, because all it takes is for one example to be brought up that can just shatter someone's illusion of that person completely, and then they realize, oh, it was all fake the whole time. It's difficult to actually manufacture a hero, basically.
Is this coming back to what we discussed in the Great Man theory, where they're qualities that cannot be manufactured, that it needs to be something that is within the person?
Yeah, this is what we're getting at, and I had a strong feeling that there was going to be a lot of crossover, which is kind of why I've tried to use different terms where possible, because otherwise we'd just be kind of rehashing the same conversation. Trying to focus more on the sort of individual exploits and the individual qualities, I suppose, rather than like how it fits into wider society.
Well, that's why I'm only bringing it up in terms of fake heroes. If you were to ask me how on earth do you produce a hero, I wouldn't flippin' know, and I don't think anyone cares.
Hitting someone with a lot of gamma rays would probably be a good start.
Slap a cape on him.
I'm being incredibly sincere here when I say that I do not even want to discuss the idea of quote unquote creating a hero, because that would just ruin the whole mystique of the whole thing. Like, I feel like there is an element that Rupert touched upon before of like mysticism and spiritualism about these people, and trying to explain it away feels like it'd just ruin it.
Yeah, ultimately you can't train someone to do something heroic. You need to have the right man in the right place, to reuse a phrase we used in the Great Man video.
Yeah.
And have that come from their own willpower, their own sense of their own self, to achieve something great.
I think you can push things, like you can kind of nudge at the edges. I'm thinking of the conduct of like many officers during the various world wars, and how they've sort of conducted themselves throughout time. And so to give a more concrete example, there was a general, a French general with the nickname the Butcher, because when he was attacking, he was a very aggressive general, and when he had his units attack, he would, just put them into situations where they take horrendous casualties and not really be worried about it at all. But he would never put his soldiers in a position that he wouldn't himself, go into. So he always led every attack, despite being a general, I believe. Or he was either a colonel or a general, and he led every attack that he ordered personally. And I still think that's heroism. But that comes very distinctly out of a certain martial culture that had been generated over time. And I think the same thing comes out in the British officer corps, around the 20th century and probably prior, though I know less about it. Same goes for Russia.
I suppose on a more personal level, someone like Alan York, who was an American sergeant during the First World War, who had managed to capture 135, I believe, German soldiers single-handedly. I suppose in the sense that if no one had ever taught him how to, use a rifle and the basics of soldiery, that would have been beyond him. But given the training and equipment, he was able to achieve those heroics.
Well, that's quite surface level, I think, in terms of the actual mechanical skills. But I think even the
I agree with that.
Even the underlying desire to compete with one another, I suppose, on on metrics that we would consider heroic usually, so self-sacrifice and justice, perhaps humility, all of this kind of stuff. It sounds weird to be competing on humility, but you know what I mean. The idea that
I'm
you
much more humble than you could even imagine.
Kurtz, I am so many levels more humble than you.
But yeah, the idea that you can get people thinking in these kinds of ways and actively looking for how they can improve their own virtue and display their virtue, rather than seeking out opportunities where they can exhibit it, rather than say looking for the best opportunity to make money.
Okay then, just as a quick question for the room, just for a bit of fun. Do you think it would be easier to make someone a hero or make someone a great man?
A hero, I think.
I'm inclined to agree with you, because I think to achieve something heroic, you really just need to do one extraordinary thing, whereas to be a great man, you need to lead an extraordinary life.
Yes, and your presence also needs to have an almost reality distorting presence. An almost reality distorting effect, I should say, where you create new realities just by what you will into existence.
Well, that's incredibly metaphysical when I think about it. As you say, a hero only has to exemplify, be an exemplar of a specific singular virtue, whereas a great man is a mixture of a king, a warrior, a philosopher, a poet. And he has to be good at all four. Not even good, he has to be exceptional at all of them.
As much as I'd love to be the contrarian, I agree.
We kind of explained it in very basic terms, where it's to be awful, and use a Skyrim meme example, it's to be a hero, you only need to get your destruction up to level 100. Meanwhile, to be a great man, you got to get all those skills up to level 100 at the same time.
I think a great man can still have some shortcomings, but like I said, his presence is almost like a reality distortion field, whereas a hero can very comfortably exist in everyone else's world and just exhibit extraordinary levels of virtue that most people didn't consider possible.
A hero can spend his entire life being a perfectly ordinary, mundane man, but as long as he has 30 good minutes of extraordinary bravery and a fully loaded machine gun, he can achieve the level of a hero.